Chapter 1. Crashing into Destiny. Coruscant. The turbolift whispered to a halt on the upper levels of Coruscant's most prestigious residential tower. Luke Skywalker stepped out, his black boots silent against the polished floor. The hallway stretched before him, floor-to-ceiling windows revealing the endless city-planet skyline. Streams of speeders and ships crisscrossing between gleaming spires that caught the setting sun. Luke paused, adjusting his grip on the small Durasteel container tucked under his arm. Its weight felt disproportionate to its size, as if the contents carried a gravity all their own. He drew a deep breath, centering himself in the force before approaching the apartment door. The door slid open before he could announce himself. Leia stood there, her smile bright but eyes immediately searching his. "I felt you coming from 3 floors down," she said, embracing him. Luke returned the hug with his free arm. "Still working on masking my presence." Han appeared behind her, leaning against the doorframe with his characteristic half-smile. "Kid, about time you showed up. We were starting to think you'd gone hermit on us again." The apartment was spacious yet comfortable, a diplomat's residence with touches of Han's practical influence. Floor-to-ceiling windows showcased Coruscant's endless horizon, the amber glow of sunset bathing everything in warm light. "Can I get you something?" Leia asked, noticing Luke's unusually solemn demeanor. Luke shook his head, placing the container on the low table in the center of the room. "I found something I think you both need to see." Han and Leia exchanged glances as they sat across from him. Luke ran his hand, his real one, not the cybernetic replacement, over the container's smooth surface. "After the Battle of Endor, I began searching for Jedi artifacts, anything that survived the Purge." Luke's voice remained steady, but his fingers betrayed his tension as they traced the container's edge. 3 weeks ago, I discovered coordinates in Ben's journals. They led to a hidden vault on Mustafar." "Mustafar?" Han frowned. "Vader's sanctuary." Luke opened the container, revealing several items nestled in protective padding. "These belong to our father, Leia. Before and after." Leia's posture stiffened as Luke carefully removed the objects. A small holoprojector, a tarnished mechanical component, a charred piece of fabric, and finally, a red crystalline polyhedron that seemed to absorb rather than reflect the room's light. Leia recoiled visibly, her chair scraping against the floor as she pushed back. Her face transformed, softness hardening into sharp angles, eyes flashing with barely contained fury. "A Sith holocron." Her voice cut through the room like a vibroblade. "Destroy it, Luke. Nothing good can come from Vader's secrets." Luke met her gaze unflinchingly. "I understand your feelings, Leia, but this holocron might contain information about Imperial remnants. Knowledge we need." "Knowledge?" Leia stood, arms crossed tightly. "That thing is a repository of dark side teachings. Every piece of that man's legacy is poison." Her voice trembled slightly. "You weren't there when he made me watch Alderaan die. You don't know what darkness he was capable of." "I was there when he saved me from the Emperor," Luke countered, his tone gentle but firm. "When he returned to the light. One moment of decency doesn't erase decades of atrocity." Luke lifted the other items from the container. "These are different. Personal effects, memories. I'll destroy them if that's what you want. But the holocron contains tactical information we can't ignore." Leia paced toward the window, silhouetted against Coruscant's skyline. "The dark side corrupts, Luke. It doesn't give without taking something in return. I faced the dark side before. I resisted it then. I can resist it now." Han, who had been uncharacteristically silent, leaned forward. He scratched his head, eyes darting between the siblings. "Look, Princess, I don't like it either, but if it helps us track down those Imperial holdouts." He shrugged, uncomfortable but practical. "We've got reports of activity in the Outer Rim. If this thing has intel on what they're planning." Leia's shoulders slumped slightly, though her face remained resolute. "You two are impossible." Luke carefully placed the personal items back in the container. "These I'll destroy as you wish, but the holocron, we need to see what's inside." He placed the red polyhedron on the table, closing his eyes and extending his hand. The room fell silent except for their breathing. For several moments, nothing happened. Then the edges of the holocron began to glow, its facets separating slightly as it rose an inch above the table's surface. A holographic image flickered to life, the unmistakable armored form of Darth Vader, helmet and mask in place, mechanical breathing eerily absent from the recording. If this recording has activated, then you have found my private vault, my son. The deep voice filled the room. What I am about to share was hidden even from the Emperor. Leia inhaled sharply. Han moved to her side, his hand finding hers. In my quest to overthrow Palpatine, I discovered his greatest secret. Beyond Rakata Prime, in the unknown regions, lies an ancient Sith artifact of immeasurable power. The Emperor spent decades searching for it. A relic said to grant its wielder power over life and death itself. Immortality, without the flawed transfer of essence he had mastered. The hologram shifted, displaying star charts and coordinates. I believe he found it shortly before his death, but was unable to claim it. If Imperial loyalists discover its location, the image of Vader seemed to look directly at Luke. You must find it first or destroy it. Such power cannot fall into the wrong hands. The holocron closed with a soft click, settling back onto the table. Luke looked up at Han and Leia. If someone like Thrawn found this artifact, they'd be unstoppable, Han finished. Luke rose to his feet. I have to go. I need to find this artifact before anyone else does. Leia stepped forward, her anger now replaced with concern. Luke, no. This could be a trap. Or worse, exactly what the dark side wants. Which is why I have to be the one to go. Then I'm coming with you, Han said, straightening. Luke shook his head. The New Republic needs you both here. This is a journey I need to make alone. Leia embraced her brother fiercely. You promised me once you'd always come back. I'm holding you to that. I'll send word when I can. Luke picked up the holocron, securing it in his belt pouch. The coordinates are in uncharted space. It won't be easy to maintain communication. Han clasped Luke's shoulder. Take the Falcon. She's faster than that X-Wing of yours. And let you miss all the fun? Luke managed to smile. I'll be fine with my ship. Leia held his gaze. May the Force be with you, Luke. Always, he answered, knowing it might be months before they saw each other again. And with you both. Unknown regions. Luke watched the streaking stars of hyperspace elongate around his cockpit, their familiar patterns gradually giving way to unknown constellations. His modified X-Wing hummed steadily, the additional hyperdrive motivators he'd installed allowing him to push deeper into the unknown regions than any New Republic vessel had ventured. R2-D2 warbled anxiously from his socket behind the cockpit. I know, old friend. We're well beyond the NAV charts now. Luke checked his instruments, confirming their position against Vader's coordinates. Another 12 hours at this speed. The Astromecha's response came as a series of concerned beeps. No, I don't sense any immediate danger. Luke adjusted the life support settings, conserving power for the long journey ahead. But stay alert. The unknown regions earned their name for good reason. As the X-Wing continued its solitary journey, Luke engaged the autopilot and closed his eyes. His breathing slowed, deepening as he settled into meditation. The cockpit around him faded from his awareness as he reached out through the Force, seeking guidance, clarity. The vastness of space reflected the emptiness he encountered. No familiar presences, no echoes of civilization, only distant pinpricks of life, scattered across immeasurable distances. And something else, a faint resonance like a whisper just beyond hearing. R2's alarmed whistle jolted Luke back to awareness. What is it, R2? The droid's frantic response scrolled across the translation screen. Unidentified vessels approaching. 3 signatures. Luke's hands flew to the controls, disengaging autopilot as he scanned the sensor readings. 3 ships had appeared from nowhere, closing fast, sleek, predatory craft with distinctive swept-back wings and reinforced hulls. Ravagers, Luke muttered, recognizing the notorious pirate vessels that prowled the edges of known space. They must have been waiting in the shadow of that asteroid field. The lead ship fired, red bolts of energy streaking past the X-Wing's port side. Luke banked hard, pushing the throttle forward as he corkscrewed away from the attack pattern. R2 shrieked in alarm. I see them, Luke called, his voice calm despite the danger. Hold tight. He reached out to the Force, letting it flow through him, enhancing his reflexes and perception. Time seemed to slow as his awareness expanded. He could feel the intent of the pilots behind him, anticipate their movements before they executed them. The Ravagers split formation, attempting to box him in. Luke waited until the last possible moment before cutting his engines and flipping the X-Wing in a maneuver that would have crushed an unprepared pilot under the G-forces. His S-foils locked into attack position as he came about, facing his pursuers. Let's even these odds. Luke's first shots caught the trailing Ravager unprepared. The precision volley struck its port engine, sending it spinning into space in a shower of sparks and debris. The second Ravager banked sharply, attempting to flank him, but Luke was already adjusting his trajectory, letting the Force guide his aim. 2 clean shots pierced the Ravager's cockpit. The ship drifted lifelessly, its systems going dark. The lead ship, however, proved more challenging. Its pilot demonstrated skill beyond the typical Ravager, executing a series of evasive maneuvers that kept Luke's targeting computer struggling to maintain a lock. R2, divert power from rear shields to weapons. Luke pursued the Ravager through a series of tight turns, trading fire as they wove between scattered asteroids. A glancing blow rocked his X-wing, but he maintained control, positioning himself for a killing shot. The Ravager suddenly reversed thrust and spun, bringing its heavier forward guns to bear. Luke had anticipated the move, already diving beneath the ship's firing arc. His quad lasers found their mark, tearing through the Ravager's hull. The enemy ship exploded, but not before launching a final desperate salvo. Multiple hits hammered Luke's X-wing, sending it tumbling through space. Warning lights flashed across his console. The hyperdrive motivator was offline. Coolant was venting from the port engines. The primary power converter showed critical damage. R2, damage report. The droid's response was grim. They had lost hyperdrive capability, and the sublight engines were operating at 30% efficiency. Life support was intact but drawing on reserve power. Luke's hands moved across the controls, trying to stabilize their trajectory. We can't continue to the coordinates. Not like this. He wiped blood from a cut above his eye where his head had struck the canopy. Run a scan for habitable systems within range. R2-D2 chirped affirmatively, his sensor dish rotating as he searched. After several tense minutes, a positive tone sounded. You found something? The Astromecha's response appeared on screen. Habitable planet detected. Oxygen-nitrogen atmosphere. Distance, 0.7 parsecs. That's our best option. Plot a course. Luke nursed the damaged X-wing toward the coordinates, watching the power levels drop steadily. By the time the blue-green planet appeared ahead, the engines were failing intermittently, and the stabilizers had gone offline. This is going to be rough, Luke warned as they approached the atmosphere. Brace yourself, R2. The X-wing shuddered violently as they hit the upper atmosphere, friction heating the hull to dangerous levels. Luke wrestled with the controls, fighting to maintain some semblance of a glide path as they plummeted toward the surface. Below, a vast continent spread out, its northern reaches covered in snow and ice. Mountains rose in jagged lines, forests carpeted valleys, and in the distance, Luke glimpsed what might have been structures, signs of civilization. The ship bucked and rolled as systems failed in cascade. The control yoke grew unresponsive in Luke's hands. R2, prepare for emergency landing. Luke closed his eyes, drawing deeply on the Force. He extended his awareness around the falling ship, creating a cushion of energy to slow their descent. Sweat beaded on his forehead from the effort as he fought against gravity itself. The X-wing plunged toward a snow-covered clearing, trailing smoke and debris. At the last moment, Luke channeled a massive surge of Force energy beneath them, slowing their fall enough to transform what would have been a fatal crash into a hard, skidding landing. The impact still slammed Luke against his restraints. His head struck the console, and darkness swallowed his consciousness as the X-wing finally came to rest in the alien snow. Unknown planet. Consciousness returned to Luke in painful waves. His head throbbed where it had struck the console, and the metallic taste of blood lingered in his mouth. Cold air bit at his face. The cockpit canopy had partially shattered on impact, letting in the frigid atmosphere of this unknown world. He blinked, clearing his vision as he assessed his surroundings. The X-wing lay half-buried in snow, its nose crumpled and one S-foil torn completely away. Smoke curled from the engine compartment, dissipating in the icy wind. R2, you still with me? A weak, staticky warble answered from behind the cockpit. Luke released his harness and pushed himself up, wincing as pain shot through his ribs. Nothing felt broken, but he'd be bruised for days. The canopy release mechanism had been damaged in the crash. Luke reached out with the Force, applying pressure until the bent metal groaned and gave way. The canopy lifted partially, enough for him to squeeze through and drop into the knee-deep snow. The cold hit him like a physical blow. His black Jedi attire, while practical for many environments, offered minimal protection against the biting chill. Luke pulled his cloak tighter around his shoulders and turned to survey the crash site. Luke paused, feeling a sudden shift in his awareness. The air around him seemed to thicken, vibrate with unseen energy. He closed his eyes, instinctively reaching out with his senses through the Force, and nearly staggered backward from the overwhelming response. The Force flooded into him like a tidal wave, raw and untamed. Unlike anything he'd experienced before, it wasn't just present here. It saturated everything. The ancient trees, the frozen ground, the very air he breathed. Luke steadied himself against the X-Wing's hull, his breath coming in short gasps as he adjusted to the sheer intensity. This place, he whispered. It almost feels like Dagobah. He extended his awareness further, feeling the currents and eddies of Force energy flowing through the landscape. It wasn't static either. The energy seemed to be gradually increasing, building like a slow-rising tide. Whatever this world was, the Force existed here in its most primal state. Luke opened his eyes, seeing the environment with new clarity. Threads of energy connected everything, pulsing with life. He'd found planets with strong Force presences before, but nothing like this, a world where the boundary between physical and spiritual seemed paper-thin. R2, he said quietly. I think we've crashed somewhere very special. They'd come down in a small clearing surrounded by dense, ancient-looking forest. Tall pines and sentinel trees stretched skyward, their dark branches heavy with snow. Mountains loomed in the distance, jagged peaks disappearing into low-hanging clouds. The air smelled clean, crisp, untouched by the industrial pollutants common to more developed worlds. Luke trudged around to R2-D2's compartment and found the droid struggling to free himself from the damaged socket. Using the Force, Luke carefully lifted R2 clear of the wreckage and set him down on the snow. How bad is it? Luke asked, brushing ice from the droid's dome. R2's assessment scrolled across Luke's datapad. Extensive damage to primary systems. Hyperdrive inoperable. Sublight engines destroyed. Communications array damaged. Luke sighed, his breath forming a cloud in the cold air. Can you access the ship's computer? I need to know where we are. The astromech extended his interface arm into the X-Wing's data port, working for several moments before responding. Eno-stellar cartography match. Planet unknown to Republic databases. Uncharted space, Luke muttered. He climbed back onto the wing and reached into the cockpit, retrieving his lightsaber and emergency pack. Run a diagnostic on the communications array. See if we can at least send a distress signal. While R2 worked, Luke checked the ship's computer directly. The damage was worse than he'd initially thought. Even if they had the parts, repairs would take weeks. And according to the environmental readings, a storm was approaching from the north. R2 beeped despondently. No communications either? Luke frowned. We need to find help then. Shelter at minimum. He looked toward the distant mountains. I sensed life forms during our descent. Intelligent ones. He placed a hand on R2's dome. Stay with the ship. I need to find help if we're going to repair this damage. The droid rocked back and forth, emitting a series of concerned whistles. I know it's cold, but your systems should hold up. Keep your heating elements active. Luke secured his lightsaber to his belt and slung the emergency pack over his shoulder. I won't go far, and I'll return as quickly as I can. R2 beeped reluctantly but retracted his third leg and settled in beside the X-Wing. Luke reached out through the Force, seeking direction. He felt the vibrant life energy of the forest, plants and animals, each with its own signature. And beyond, faint but unmistakable, the more complex presence of sentient minds. Humanoid, he thought, though something about them felt different from what he was accustomed to. He set off toward the east, where the forest seemed less dense. The snow crunched beneath his boots as he walked, each breath visible in the frigid air. Despite the cold, there was something peaceful about this place. A raw, untamed beauty unlike the carefully managed ecosystems of core worlds. Luke had traveled perhaps half a mile when he felt it. A sudden spike of aggressive intent in the Force. He stopped, hand moving to his lightsaber as he scanned the treeline. The massive stag burst from the forest without warning, antlers lowered and aimed directly at Luke's chest. The creature was enormous, far larger than any deer species Luke had encountered, with a rack of antlers that spanned wider than his outstretched arms. Luke sidestepped at the last moment, the stag's charge missing him by inches. The animal skidded in the snow, snorting clouds of vapor as it wheeled around for another attack. This time, Luke reached out with the force. As the stag charged again, he pushed, not violently, but firmly enough to halt the creature's momentum and divert its path. The stag stumbled sideways, confused by the invisible barrier, its hooves scrambling for purchase in the snow. "Easy," Luke murmured, maintaining the gentle pressure. "I mean no harm." The stag tossed its head, pawing at the ground as it prepared for a third charge. But the attack never came. A blur of gray erupted from the forest edge. A massive wolf, its coat pale as the snow itself, eyes gleaming amber in the winter light. The dire wolf slammed into the stag's flank with terrible force, massive jaws clamping around the animal's throat. Luke stepped back, hands still on his lightsaber but not igniting it. The stag fought desperately, kicking and thrashing, but the wolf's grip was unbreakable. Blood stained the snow crimson as the dire wolf dragged its prey down. Only when the stag lay still did Luke notice the wolf's distended belly. She was pregnant, hunting to feed herself and her unborn pups. The dire wolf raised her head, muzzle dark with blood, and locked eyes with Luke. Something passed between them, a connection through the force unlike anything Luke had experienced before. This was no ordinary animal. Intelligence gleamed in those amber eyes, along with something else. Curiosity, perhaps, or recognition. Luke remained motionless, opening himself to the force, letting it flow between them. The wolf tilted her head, studying him with an almost human intensity. Luke sensed no aggression now, only a wild, fierce awareness. After what seemed like an eternity, the wolf lowered her head and returned to her kill, tearing at the stag's flesh. Luke backed away slowly, continuing his journey eastward, feeling the wolf's gaze on his back long after he'd left the clearing. As he walked, Luke extended his senses further, seeking the human presences he'd detected earlier. They were closer now, perhaps a few miles ahead. Settlements, groups of people moving with purpose. Civilization. He quickened his pace, pushing through deepening snow as the terrain began to rise. The forest thinned, giving way to rolling hills that would eventually become the mountains visible on the horizon. Luke paused at the crest of a hill, catching his breath. Movement in his peripheral vision caught his attention. The white dire wolf had followed him, keeping to the shadows of the treeline, watching. Luke felt no threat from her, only a strange sense that their paths were meant to cross. "Following me?" he asked quietly. The wolf made no sound, but her intent was clear in the force. She was indeed following, maintaining a cautious distance while keeping him in sight. Luke continued onward, aware of his silent companion but focusing on the human presences growing stronger ahead. He needed to find help, establish contact, determine if this world had the technology necessary to repair his ship, or at least the means to signal the new republic. The distant sound of hoofbeats reached his ears. Luke paused, extending his senses. Riders approached, a group of them moving with purpose through the forest to his right. Not directly toward him, but on a course that would intersect with his path. Luke moved to open ground, wanting to be visible, to appear non-threatening. He stood tall on a small rise, silhouetted against the afternoon sky, and waited. The hoofbeats grew louder. Then, from the forest edge, the first riders appeared. Men in heavy furs and leathers, armed with swords and spears, riding sturdy horses. They flew a banner, gray with a snarling dire wolf emblazoned upon it, eerily similar to the creature watching from the distant treeline. They spotted him immediately. With practiced precision, the group spread out, encircling Luke's position. More riders emerged from the trees until he counted 8 in total, all regarding him with suspicious eyes, hands on weapons. The lead rider urged his horse forward. He was younger than the others, with a stern face framed by dark hair and a closely trimmed beard. His posture spoke of authority, his eyes assessing Luke with a wary intelligence. "Halt, stranger. Identify yourself." The man's voice carried across the snowy hillside, formal and unyielding. Luke sensed the dire wolf watching from the forest edge, her presence creating an unseen tension. The riders hadn't noticed her yet, but Luke felt her attention shift between him and the newcomers, particularly their banner with its familiar sigil. Luke stood his ground, hands visible and away from his weapons, preparing to answer, and wondering how to explain his presence in this unknown world to men who had likely never conceived of life beyond their skies. Chapter 2. A Meeting on the King's Road. Year 298 AC. King's Road, the North. The snow fell in lazy spirals through the weak winter sunlight, catching on the fur-lined cloaks of Eddard Stark's party as they rode through the Wolfswood. Ned's breath clouded before him, mingling with that of his mount. The afternoon light filtered through the ancient sentinel trees, casting long shadows across the forest floor. The deserter was found near Long Lake, Ned told his sons as they rode. A ranger from the Shadow Tower. He abandoned his post and fled south. Robb, riding at his right, nodded grimly. The third this year. Something drives them from the wall, Jon Snow added quietly from behind. More than just wildlings. Theon Greyjoy snorted. Fear drives them. Nothing more. Ned glanced back at his ward, then to young Bran, who rode a pony between his brothers. The boy's eyes were wide, taking in everything. His first time witnessing the king's justice. Too young, perhaps, but winter was coming. Northern children couldn't afford long childhoods. Jory Castle, captain of Ned's household guard, suddenly raised a hand. "My lord," he called, voice low with caution. Ned followed his gaze to a snow-covered rise ahead. A lone figure stood there, dressed in black, silhouetted against the pale winter sky. "Hold," Ned commanded, his party immediately halting. He studied the stranger with narrowed eyes. "Not one of ours." The figure made no move to flee or approach, simply stood watching them. "A wildling scout?" Jory suggested, hand moving to his sword. "Perhaps." Ned raised his arm, signaling his men to form a perimeter. "Theon and Tom stay with Bran. Robb, Jon, Heward, Desmond guard our flanks." He nodded to Jory. "With me." They urged their horses forward, approaching the rise with measured caution. As they drew closer, Ned assessed the stranger with the practiced eye of a battle commander. The man wasn't too old, perhaps of a decade younger than him, with light hair and a lean build. His garments were black, but unlike anything Ned had seen before. Not the rough-spun wool of the Night's Watch, nor the furs of wildlings, nor any fashion known in the Seven Kingdoms. The material seemed almost to shine in places, with fastenings unlike any Ned recognized. A peculiar cylinder hung at the stranger's hip. Despite the odd appearance, the man carried himself with quiet dignity. Though Ned noted signs of recent injury, dried blood on his temple, the careful way he held himself, the stranger showed no fear as they approached. Ned halted his mount 20 paces from the figure, hand resting on Ice's pommel. "Identify yourself," he called, voice carrying across the snow. The stranger spoke, but the words were utterly foreign. No language Ned had ever heard in all his travels. The man seemed to realize this, for he stopped, then gestured to himself and spoke more slowly. "Luke Skywalker." "Luke Skywalker," Ned repeated, testing the strange name. He glanced at Jory. "Not a wildling. His clothes are too fine, strange as they are." "No wildling I've ever seen," Jory agreed. "Nor any man of the Watch." Ned nodded. "Eddard Stark," he replied, tapping his chest. The stranger smiled slightly, seeming pleased at this small breakthrough. He gestured expansively at the horizon, then pointed back the way they had come. "Far lands," he said carefully. "Vessel damaged." Ned frowned, parsing the broken words. "You traveled from distant shores? And your ship was wrecked?" Luke nodded, his hands mimicking waves. "Great waters." He made a crashing motion with his hand. Ned was about to speak again when movement at the treeline caught his eye. A massive shape emerged from the forest, white as the snow itself, with eyes that gleamed like amber in the winter light. A direwolf, her belly swollen with pups. "Gods be good," Jory gasped, drawing his sword. Behind them, the rest of the party reacted with alarm. Horses nickered nervously as weapons were drawn. Ned himself felt a cold shock run through him. No direwolf had been seen south of the wall in his lifetime, nor his father's before him. "Steady," Ned commanded, drawing ice with a metallic whisper. The Valyrian steel caught the pale sunlight as he prepared to defend against the beast. But the direwolf paid them no mind. Instead, she padded directly toward the stranger in black, her movements deliberate but showing no aggression. The man Luke turned toward her without fear. Ned watched in astonishment as the stranger knelt, extending his hand. The direwolf approached, massive head level with the kneeling man's, and allowed him to touch her between the ears. "By the old gods," Ned whispered. "I've not seen the like in all my years." The tableau before him seemed drawn from old Nan's tales, a mysterious figure communing with a creature of legend. The direwolf, a beast that could tear a man's throat out in an instant, stood docile as a hound before this stranger. Rob urged his horse forward to Ned's side, his young face a mixture of wonder and wariness. "Father, what manner of man is this? No wildling commands direwolves." Jon Snow had approached as well, his dark eyes studying the stranger intently. "Look how he stands. He's a warrior, though strangely not armed." Theon, who had ignored Ned's command to stay with Bran, smirked from atop his mount. "Perhaps he's a woods witch in men's clothing, to tame such beasts." Bran had followed too, his pony nervous but steady. The boy's eyes were wide with wonder. "Father, the wolf doesn't fear him at all." Ned sheathed ice, his decision made. There was something about this man, something that spoke of the old gods. "We'll take him with us. The deserter awaits justice, and afterward we'll bring this stranger to Winterfell." He looked once more at the man communing with the direwolf. "The old gods have placed him in our path for a reason." Ned dismounted, handing his reins to Jory. He approached the stranger slowly, hands open and empty at his sides to show peaceful intent. The direwolf watched him come, but made no threatening move. "Luke Skywalker," Ned said, gesturing to the man, then to himself. "Eddard Stark, Lord of Winterfell, Warden of the North." The stranger nodded, seeming to understand the introduction if not the words themselves. Ned pointed to his horse, then to the path they had been traveling, then made a motion of walking together. The man, Luke, studied him for a moment, then nodded again. He spoke a few words in his strange tongue, his tone indicating acceptance. Ned returned to his horse and lifted Bran down from his pony. The boy looked disappointed. "You'll ride with Robb," Ned told him, then gestured for the stranger to take the pony. Luke Skywalker approached cautiously. When he reached them, he surprised Ned by bowing formally from the waist, a courtly gesture no wildling would know. He accepted the offered mount with a nod of thanks. "No common wildling indeed," Ned murmured to Jory as they prepared to depart. As they turned their horses back toward the path, Ned noticed the white direwolf following at a distance, her eyes never leaving the stranger. The great beast kept pace with them through the trees, a silent guardian to their unusual guest. "Father," Bran called from where he sat before Robb, "will the wolf follow us all the way to Winterfell?" "I know not," Ned answered truthfully, "but I believe she follows him, not us." They rode in tense silence, the men casting frequent glances at both the stranger and the direwolf shadowing their party. Ned's mind turned over the implications of what he had witnessed. A man of unknown origin, dressed in strange garments, with the ability to calm a direwolf, a creature not seen in the north for generations. Old Nan's stories whispered through his memory. Tales of the children of the forest, of skin-changers and greenseers, of the long night and the last hero. Ned had never put much stock in such tales, but he was a Stark of Winterfell, and the blood of the first men ran in his veins. Some things could not be dismissed so easily. Whatever powers this stranger possessed, whatever strange land he hailed from, Ned would bring him to Winterfell and learn his purpose. The North remembered, and the Stark in Winterfell must know what walked his lands. The white direwolf followed them all the way to the edge of the Wolfswood, a pale shadow moving between the trees. Kingsroad, the North. Luke adjusted himself on the small pony, grateful for the mount despite its size. As they rode, he discreetly activated the universal translator in his belt, hoping the device had survived the crash intact. A soft beep and green indicator light confirmed it was working, beginning to process the unfamiliar language. The party moved through the snow-covered landscape with practiced ease. Luke reached out through the Force, studying the group that had found him. Their emotions and connections flowed like currents. Loyalty, duty, curiosity, and wariness all mingled together. The leader, Eddard Stark, he'd gathered from the introduction, radiated authority tempered with fairness. The men deferred to him naturally, not from fear but respect. Luke's attention shifted to the three boys. Each glowed differently in the Force, their signatures distinct yet all-powerful in ways they likely didn't understand. The quiet, dark-haired youth who rode slightly apart from the others caught Luke's attention first. His dormant yet immense Force presence was controlled, disciplined, like a saber held in check, but beneath it lay something hidden, a heritage or destiny not yet revealed. The eldest son rode beside his father with easy confidence. His Force signature spoke of steady leadership and a powerful sense of duty, qualities that would serve him well if properly channeled. But it was the youngest boy, now riding with his brother, whose Force presence truly surprised Luke. Though dormant, the child possessed an unusual connection to something mystical, like tendrils reaching into the unseen world. Luke had encountered similar signatures among those with profound Force visions. 3 extremely powerful Force sensitives in one family, Luke thought. Unheard of in any world. The white direwolf continued following at a distance, her eyes occasionally meeting Luke's. Through the Force, he sensed her wild intelligence and protective nature. She wasn't merely an animal. There was something more there, a connection to this land he didn't yet understand. As they rode, Luke felt profound gratitude for their hospitality. Despite his strange appearance and inability to communicate, they had offered him shelter rather than hostility. Such kindness to strangers wasn't universal across the galaxy. After riding for nearly an hour, they crested a small hill. Below, a grim tableau awaited. A ragged man in black clothes knelt on the frozen ground, surrounded by armed guards. His hands were bound, his face haggard with fear. Luke's translator beeped softly, beginning to decipher fragments of conversation. "Deserter from the Watch," came one voice. "Broke his oath," said another. "The wall requires." The leader, Stark, dismounted, his expression solemn. The others followed, leaving Luke uncertain of protocol. He remained on his pony until one of the men gestured for him to join them. The prisoner was brought forward, trembling visibly. Luke extended his senses toward the man and recoiled slightly at the raw terror he encountered. This wasn't merely the fear of execution. There was something deeper, more primal in the man's dread. The deserter began speaking frantically, his words tumbling out in desperate bursts. Luke's translator caught pieces. "Saw them with my own eyes. White walkers. The dead walking. Not lying." Luke felt a chill that had nothing to do with the snow. The Force rippled around the man's words with the unmistakable resonance of truth. Whatever this man had seen, he believed it completely. Stark listened impassively, his face betraying nothing. When the prisoner finished, he nodded once and drew a massive sword from its sheath. The blade caught Luke's attention immediately. It hummed strangely in the Force, unlike any weapon Luke had encountered. Ancient and powerful, it carried echoes of countless lives it had taken. "In the name of Robert of the House Baratheon, the first of his name, King of the Undulls and the Rhoynar and the First Men, Lord of the Seven Kingdoms and Protector of the Realm," Stark intoned, his voice carrying across the hillside. "I, Eddard of the House Stark, Lord of Winterfell and Warden of the North, sentence you to die." Luke watched the boys' reactions. The eldest stood tall, his face a mask of solemn acceptance. The dark-haired youth knelt beside the youngest, whispering something in his ear. Luke caught the words through his now functioning translator. "Don't look away. Father will know if you do." The young ward, Theon, watched with inappropriate eagerness, a smile playing at his lips. The great sword fell in a single, clean stroke. Luke maintained his Jedi composure as he felt the man's life force extinguish in the Force. A brief flare, then nothing. He had witnessed death before many times, yet it never became easier. Luke understood this was their justice system, harsh perhaps, but he had seen many variations across the galaxy. On some worlds, criminals were mind-wiped. On others, imprisoned for life in stasis fields. Each civilization found its own balance between justice and mercy. This was their way, and it wasn't his place to judge. As the men prepared to depart, Luke felt his attention drawn northward by an instinctive pull in the Force. He turned, gazing toward the distant horizon. There, beyond his sight but not beyond his senses, lay something troubling. A vast emptiness that wasn't truly empty. Not an absence of the Force, but something consuming it, like a wound in the fabric of life itself. The white direwolf, who had watched the execution from the treeline, lifted her head and howled. A sound that carried across the snow-covered hills. The sound resonated with the danger Luke sensed beyond. "The wall stands strong," one of the men said, his words now clearer through Luke's translator. "Winter is coming," Stark replied, his tone heavy with meaning beyond the simple words. Luke closed his eyes briefly, centering himself in the Force. The certainty grew within him. His crash on this world was no accident. The Force had guided him here for a purpose connected to whatever lay in the north. As they mounted to return, Luke resolved to learn more about this world, its people, and the potential threat he sensed. The Jedi path had always been one of protection and balance. If darkness threatened here, he would face it. Their journey back took them through a different part of the forest, the path winding through dense thickets of ancient evergreens. The air was still and silent, save for the muffled crunch of hooves on snow and the occasional creak of leather saddles. Suddenly, the party halted, horses snorting and stamping restlessly. The white direwolf, who had been shadowing their steps from a distance, emerged from the undergrowth, her movements slow and labored. She seemed to groan, a sound of distress that echoed through the trees. Luke, attuned to the living force around him, sensed the animal's plight immediately. He dismounted smoothly, raising a hand in a gesture of calm to forestall any action from the startled men. "Wait," he said, the translator rendering his words into their language. "She needs help." He approached the direwolf cautiously, projecting soothing energy through the force. The creature's red eyes met his, and an understanding passed between them. She lay down heavily on her side, panting, as the first contractions rippled through her body. Minutes passed, the men waiting in astonished silence as Luke knelt beside the laboring wolf, his presence seeming to ease her distress. Then, with a final heave and a sharp whine, she gave birth to a litter of pups, their tiny forms wriggling against her white fur, seeking warmth and sustenance. As the men discussed the pup's fate, Luke sensed the force unfolding. The older two children approached the direwolf cautiously, each drawn to a different pup and the mother allowing them close. The force swirled around them, creating patterns of connection Luke could clearly see, bonds forming that would shape their futures. "We should take them," John said, stepping closer to the wolf, his eyes fixed on the albino pup with red eyes. "The mother has been following us. It's a sign." Rob nodded in agreement as he carefully picked up one of the pups, the mother watching them with surprising calm. Lord Stark considered for a moment, then gave a solemn nod. "Very well, but understand this. These pups are your responsibility, not your servants or your nurses. You will feed them yourselves, train them yourselves, and if they die, you will bury them yourselves." Through the force, Luke felt the powerful resonance between the boy and the albino pup, a connection mirroring that between him and the white direwolf that had been following them. The translator captured the words perfectly, and Luke understood their significance. Something profound was unfolding on this strange world, and somehow, Luke Skywalker was now part of it. Outskirts of Winterfell, the north. The road to Winterfell stretched before them, a winding ribbon of packed snow between ancient pines. Ned Stark rode at the head of his party, the strange visitor mounted on Bran's pony beside him. The afternoon light was fading, casting long shadows across the white landscape as the first few snowflakes began to fall. Eddard studied the foreigner from the corner of his eye. Luke Skywalker sat his mount with the easy grace of a man accustomed to riding, though something in his posture suggested he was more comfortable with a different kind of steed. The man had been silent for some time, his fingers occasionally touching a small device at his belt. The white direwolf loped through the trees parallel to their path, keeping pace but maintaining her distance. Luke's eyes followed her movements, concern evident in his expression. "The beast follows you," Eddard observed. "I've never seen a direwolf act thus with any man." Luke's gaze remained on the white wolf. He nodded slowly, then closed his eyes briefly as if in concentration. When he opened them, he spoke more clearly than before. "She is weak. Many pups birth." Eddard raised an eyebrow. The man could sense the direwolf somehow. Another piece of the mystery. "The gods have strange ways of bringing men to where they're needed," Eddard said, more to himself than to the stranger. They rode in silence for a time, the rhythmic crunch of hooves on snow the only sound. Rob urged his horse forward, drawing alongside them. His young face was serious, eyes assessing the stranger with the wariness of a future lord. "Father, can we trust this stranger? These are uncertain times." Before Eddard could answer, Jon Snow moved his mount up on the other side. His dark eyes studied Luke with quiet intensity. "He does not carry a weapon," Jon offered. "Even if we cannot trust him, it's better to find out his purpose." Theon Greyjoy snorted from behind them. "Perhaps he's addled in the mind. Claims to have journeyed farther than any map shows." "Did you see how the direwolf let him touch her, father?" Bran called excitedly from where he rode with Rob. "Not even our kennel master could do that." Eddard considered his son's words, weighing each perspective. The stranger, Luke, watched this exchange with calm interest, his eyes moving from speaker to speaker as if he understood more than his limited words suggested. The white direwolf, who had been keeping her distance, suddenly drew closer to their party. She padded through the snow, approaching Luke's mount without hesitation. The pony skittered nervously, but Luke calmed it with a gentle hand. Then he extended his other hand toward the wolf, palm down. Eddard watched in fascination as something unspoken seemed to pass between man and beast. The direwolf's amber eyes locked with Luke's blue ones, a connection forming that was almost tangible. "Amid Allah," Luke said softly, the words strange yet spoken with unmistakable affection. "You name her?" Eddard asked. Luke nodded. "Brave woman, strong, protector. Someone dear to you?" Eddard guessed, recognizing the look in the man's eyes. Luke smiled forlornly but didn't elaborate. Eddard weighed all he had seen and heard. The stranger's appearance, his unusual garments, his affinity with the direwolf, all pointed to something beyond ordinary explanation. Yet the man had shown no hostility, only a dignified patience and evident intelligence. "We'll offer him guest right and learn his purpose," Eddard decided, addressing his sons. "Winter is coming, and we must know friend from foe." As they crested the final hill, the massive gray walls of Winterfell appeared on the horizon, towers and turrets rising against the darkening sky. Smoke from countless hearths spiraled upward, promising warmth against the gathering chill. Eddard watched Luke's reaction to the first sight of the ancient fortress. The stranger's eyes narrowed slightly, his gaze methodically tracing the walls, towers, and gates. It wasn't simple awe Ned saw in his expression, but assessment. The look of a man who had seen greater fortifications but respected what stood before him. Luke's eyes lingered on the defensive positions, noting the thickness of the walls, the placement of the guard towers. His glance took in the moat, the drawbridge, the iron-studded gates. Ned recognized the evaluation of a warrior, though the stranger made no comment. As they approached the main gate, guards called down greetings, the portcullis rising to admit their lord and his party. They clattered across the drawbridge and into the outer yard, where stable boys rushed forward to take their mounts. Catelyn stood waiting in the courtyard, her tully-red hair bright against the gray stone and white snow. Her eyes immediately found Ned, then moved to the stranger, widening slightly. Her gaze then fell to the bundle each child carried, the direwolf pups, now wrapped in cloaks, before shifting to the white direwolf that had followed them to the very gates of Winterfell but remained outside. "Ned, what is this?" she asked, fear and concern evident in her voice. Ned dismounted and went to his wife, taking her cold hands in his. "A lost traveler, Cat, and a sign from the old gods. Direwolf pups, one for each of the children." Catelyn's eyes returned to Luke, who had dismounted and now stood respectfully to one side. She studied him with the shrewd assessment of a lady who had managed a great house for many years. "He has a strange look about him," she said quietly. "Not of the north, nor any land I know." Luke stepped forward and bowed formally from the waist, a gesture of respect that seemed practiced and natural to him. His posture and the precise angle of the bow suggested training beyond that of common warriors, something courtly, almost ceremonial. Catelyn's expression softened slightly at this show of courtesy, though wariness remained in her eyes. She turned to her daughters, Sansa and Arya, who had been watching the exchange with wide-eyed curiosity. "Girls, this is our guest," Catelyn said, her voice gentle but firm. "Mind your manners." Sansa, ever the perfect little lady, curtsied gracefully. "Welcome to Winterfell, sir." Arya, however, was not so easily tamed. She stepped forward, her gray eyes bright with interest. "Where are you from? What's that thing on your belt? Are you a knight?" Luke smiled at the girl's enthusiasm, but his attempts to answer were hampered by the language barrier. He managed a few halting words, gesturing to his strange device, but it was clear he could not fully express himself. "Come," Eddard said, gesturing for Luke to follow. "The hour grows late, and the cold deepens. We'll speak more inside." He led the way into the great hall, where fires roared in the massive hearths at either end. Servants hurried to bring bread and salt, the ancient symbols of guest right. Ned watched as Luke accepted them, his manner suggesting he understood the significance of the ritual. "The stranger speaks little of our tongue," Eddard explained to Maester Luwin, who had appeared at his elbow. "Perhaps your learning might help us understand him." Luwin's chain clinked softly as he approached Luke, his keen eyes taking in every detail of the foreigner's appearance. When Luke produced the small device from his belt, the one Ned had seen him touch on the road, Luwin's scholarly interest was immediately piqued. "Remarkable craftsmanship," the maester murmured, leaning closer to examine it. "Unlike anything in my studies." Luke allowed the examination but gently prevented Luwin from taking the device apart, making gestures to indicate its delicate nature. The maester nodded in understanding, though disappointment flickered across his face. The children gathered around, each proudly showing Luke their new direwolf pups. Rob's was gray and fierce, already growling at the world. Sansa's was the gentlest of the litter, while Arya's nipped playfully at anyone who came too close. Bran's had yet to open its eyes, and Rickon's was already the wildest. Jon stood slightly apart, the white pup with red eyes cradled in his arms. Through the window, Eddard saw the white direwolf, Amidala, a unique name, sitting in the snow beyond the walls. She lifted her head and howled, a sound that carried clearly into the hall. Luke turned toward the sound, and Ned saw something pass across his face, a strengthening of whatever bond existed between them. Can Amidala have place? Inside walls? Luke asked haltingly, gesturing toward the direwolf. Need food? For her? Yes, Eddard nodded with a pause. The direwolf is welcome within Winterfell's walls. He turned and called to the kettlemaster, who approached with visible trepidation. Fetch meat for the direwolf, Eddard commanded. The man's eyes darted nervously to the white beast, but he bowed quickly. At once, lord, he said, hurrying away to comply. Eddard watched as Luke's eyes swept around the great hall, taking in the massive hearths, ancient tapestries, and the weathered stone walls that had sheltered Starks for thousands of years. The stranger seemed to appreciate the fortress's age and strength in a way few visitors did. Servants brought platters of roasted meat, fresh bread, and winter vegetables to the high table. The aroma of hearty northern cooking filled the hall, reminding Ned how long it had been since their midday meal. You must be hungry after your journey, Eddard said, gesturing to the laden table. Eat your fill. Afterward, we will speak privately in my solar. I have many questions about your arrival in the north. Luke nodded in understanding, surprisingly his grasp of their language clearly improving with each passing hour. He bowed his head slightly in thanks, the gesture refined and practiced. I am grateful for your hospitality, Lord Stark, he replied carefully, the words coming more smoothly than before. Arya, who had been watching Luke with unwavering attention since his arrival, suddenly pushed forward. Her dark hair was coming loose from its braid, and her gray eyes, so like Ned's own, sparkled with determination. Father, I want to come too, she announced, chin jutting forward stubbornly. I want to hear about where he's from and what that thing on his belt does. Eddard fought back a smile. His youngest daughter had always been insatiably curious, fearless in her pursuit of knowledge. In that, she reminded him painfully of Lyanna. No, Arya, he said, keeping his voice firm despite his amusement. This will be a private conversation. Our guest has traveled far and needs rest, not endless questions from curious little wolves. Arya's face fell, but the stubborn set of her jaw told Ned this wouldn't be the end of it. She'd likely try to eavesdrop or find some other way to satisfy her curiosity. That was Arya, wild as the wolf pup she now carried. You can speak with our guest on the morrow, Eddard added more gently, after he's had proper rest. Arya looked ready to argue further, but Catelyn's warning glance silenced her. With a dramatic sigh that only a child could muster, she retreated to her seat, though her eyes never left their mysterious visitor. Chapter 3, Between Worlds and Words. Year 298 AC. Winterfell, the North. Luke sat beside Maester Luwin at the high table, the elderly scholar's chain clinking softly whenever he leaned forward with another question. The universal translator had made remarkable progress in the past hours, allowing Luke to understand most of what was said around him, though his own responses remained somewhat halting. The great hall of Winterfell hummed with conversation and the clatter of wooden trenchers. Firelight danced across stone walls that had stood for thousands of years, casting long shadows behind the massive wooden beams overhead. Luke had visited many worlds with medieval-level technology, but rarely had he encountered a structure that radiated such a profound sense of history. Your device, Luwin said, gesturing discreetly to the translator at Luke's belt. I've never seen its like. The craftsmanship is extraordinary. Luke nodded, carefully choosing his words. From my homeland. Helps me learn your language. The maester's eyes sparkled with intellectual curiosity. Fascinating. And where exactly is this homeland? Very far, Luke replied, grateful when a servant arrived with another platter of roasted meat, providing a momentary distraction. As he ate, Luke's attention drifted across the hall. The Force signatures of the Stark family blazed like beacons against the more subdued presence of the other diners. He'd encountered Force-sensitive families before, the Halcyon clan on Corellia, several Mirluka lineages, but never had he seen such raw potential concentrated in a single bloodline. Lord Eddard sat at the center of the high table, his presence in the Force steady and resolute like bedrock. Beside him, Lady Caitlyn's energy flowed with protective currents, her eyes constantly moving between her children. Though not Force-sensitive herself, her love created bonds that resonated clearly in the Force. The eldest son, Rob, radiated leadership and duty. His Force signature pulsed with controlled power, disciplined but untapped. His connection to the gray direwolf pup at his feet was already strengthening, the animal's wild energy harmonizing with his own. Beside him sat Sansa, the eldest daughter. Her Force presence shimmered with sensitivity and perception. A natural empath whose abilities, if trained, could allow her to sense emotions and intentions with remarkable clarity. Her connection to her own pup was more tentative, reflecting her cautious nature. The younger daughter, Arya, was perhaps the most intriguing. Her Force signature crackled with untamed energy, quick, adaptive, and incredibly strong. Where her siblings' potential remained dormant, hers seemed to strain against invisible boundaries, seeking expression. She caught Luke watching her and stared back boldly, unabashed by his attention. At a lower table sat Jon Snow, the dark-haired youth who rode apart from the others. His Force signature was perhaps the strongest of all, yet somehow contained, as if hidden behind a wall of ice. The white direwolf pup with red eyes slept in his lap, their energies already intertwined in the Force. Young Bran's presence flickered with visions not yet seen, his potential oriented toward perception beyond normal senses. The smallest child, Rickon, was a wild flare of unformed power, too young for Luke to discern its eventual nature. Such concentration of Force sensitivity in one family was unprecedented in Luke's experience. On most worlds, Force-sensitive individuals appeared randomly throughout the population. Here, it seemed to run strongly in bloodlines, a genetic trait rather than a cosmic accident. More ale. A servant approached with a pitcher. Luke covered his cup with his hand. Diluted, if you have it. He needed to keep his wits about him for the coming conversation with Lord Stark. Already, Luke was formulating how to explain his presence without overwhelming this pre-spaceflight society. His years as a Jedi had taught him to respect indigenous cultures, to avoid disrupting their natural development with knowledge they weren't ready to receive. Lord Stark rose from his seat, signaling the meal's conclusion. He approached Luke with measured steps, his expression guarded but not hostile. "If you're finished, we'll speak in my solar now." Luke nodded, rising from his seat. "I am ready." As they moved to leave the hall, Luke sensed Arya's disappointment. The girl had been watching him throughout the meal, her curiosity a palpable force. He offered her a small smile as he passed, receiving a reluctant half-smile in return. Lord Stark led him through stone corridors lit by torches set in iron brackets. Guards in gray cloaks stood at intervals, their hands resting casually on sword hilts as they watched Luke pass. The universal translator continued to process the ambient conversations, expanding its vocabulary with each passing minute. They climbed a narrow spiral staircase to a tower room, Lord Stark's private solar. The chamber was warm, heated by a fire burning in a stone hearth. Maps of the north adorned the walls, alongside mounted weapons and the mounted head of a great elk. A heavy wooden desk dominated one side of the room, covered with parchments and ledgers. A side table held a pitcher of ale and 2 cups. Luke's gaze swept across the solar's northern wall, drawn to the massive maps stretched between 2 iron sconces. Ink lines traced rivers and roads, mountains rendered in careful crosshatching. His eyes found Winterfell quickly, a small castle symbol at the heart of the north, surrounded by vast expanses of forest and frozen wasteland. The wall dominated the map's upper edge, a thick black line separating the known from the unknown. The fire popped, sending sparks up the chimney. Luke caught the faint scent of pine resin from the logs, mixed with old leather from the books lining the far wall. His peripheral vision tracked Lord Stark moving toward the door, the soft scrape of his boots on stone marking each step. Lord Stark closed the door behind them, the sound echoing in the quiet room. He gestured to one of 2 chairs before the fire. "Please sit." Luke took the offered seat, noting how the firelight cast long shadows across the stone floor. Stark remained standing for a moment, studying his guest with penetrating gray eyes before finally taking the second chair. Now, Stark began, his voice low and direct, I would know the truth of who you are and how you came to be in the North. Luke met his gaze steadily. My name is Luke Skywalker, as I told you. My ship crashed on your shores. I was seeking help when you found me. Ship? Stark's eyes narrowed slightly. From across the narrow sea? You're no Associ trader I've ever encountered. Luke considered his words carefully. I come from much farther than that, beyond any sea your maps show. And this ship, where did it crash? In the forest, about a fortnight's walk from where we met. Luke gestured northward. It struck a rocky shore near the ocean. Stark seemed to accept this partial truth, though suspicion lingered in his eyes. What brings a man from beyond known waters to the north? Few seek these lands willingly, especially as winter approaches. This was the moment Luke had been preparing for, the delicate balance between truth and overwhelming revelation. I seek an ancient artifact, he said carefully. Something of great power, hidden in the far north. I can sense its presence. Sense it. Stark's hand moved subtly closer to the knife at his belt. What manner of man senses things from leagues away? Luke kept his posture relaxed, non-threatening. Where I come from, some people are born with abilities others don't have. I was born with the ability to sense certain energies, certain objects. And what is this artifact you seek? I'm not entirely certain, Luke admitted, but I believe it's very old and very dangerous. I was drawn here to find it before others do. Lord Stark's expression darkened. The lands beyond the wall are no place for treasure hunters, no matter how unusual their gifts. Wildlings would cut your throat before you traveled a league. And worse things lurk in those snows. The wall? Luke asked, genuinely curious. I sensed something vast to the north. A barrier of some kind. Stark studied him with renewed intensity. You truly aren't from any known land, are you? The wall is 700 feet of ice stretching across the neck of Westeros. It stood for thousands of years, guarded by the Night's Watch, keeping the realms of men safe from what lies beyond. And what lies beyond? Luke asked, sensing they were approaching something significant. Officially, wildlings, assortment of clans who refused to kneel. Unofficially, Stark paused, seeming to weigh his words. The deserter we executed today claimed to have seen White Walkers, the dead walking. Most dismiss such tales as madness. But you sensed truth in his words, Luke finished. As did I. Their eyes met in shared understanding. Luke felt the force stirring between them, not because Stark was sensitive to it, but because truth itself resonated in the energy that bound all living things. There's a darkness beyond your wall, Luke said quietly. I've felt it since I arrived. It's what drew me here, I think. The artifact I seek may be connected to it. Stark nodded slowly, some of his suspicion fading. The old gods may have brought you here for a purpose, then. Few heed the warnings of the North these days. Luke decided to shift the conversation, seeing an opening. Your children are quite remarkable. The effect was immediate. Stark's posture stiffened, his hand moving closer to his weapon. What do you mean by that? Luke recognized his misstep. He'd moved too quickly, touched on something fiercely protected. I meant no offense. They seem gifted, especially in their connection to the direwolves. What do you know of my children? Stark's voice had taken on a dangerous edge. Luke decided that words alone would not suffice. Sometimes a demonstration was worth 1,000 explanations. With a subtle gesture, he reached out through the force toward the pitcher on the side table. It rose smoothly into the air, floating across the room toward them. Another gentle manipulation of the force removed the stopper, and the pitcher tipped to pour ale into Lord Stark's empty cup before settling back on the table. Stark half rose from his chair, his hand now gripping his sword hilt, partially drawing the blade. What sorcery is this? Luke kept his posture relaxed, his hands visible and empty. Not sorcery. Where I come from, we call it the Force. It's an energy field that connects all living things. Some people, like me, can feel it and use it. Are you a sorcerer from Ass High, then? Stark demanded, his sword now partially drawn. A Shadowbinder? Luke seized on the cultural reference. Similar, perhaps, but not the same. I use this power to protect, to help. Never to harm unless absolutely necessary. Stark's sword remained half-drawn, but he didn't advance. And you claim my children have this power? They have the potential, Luke said carefully. I can sense it in them, dormant but strong. All your children have it to some degree. And the darkness you sense beyond the wall, it's connected to this force? Luke nodded. The force has two aspects, light and dark. What I sense beyond your wall is the dark side, growing stronger. That's what concerns me. Stark slowly resheathed his sword, though wariness remained in his posture. And my children, what does this mean for them? Without training, their abilities will likely remain dormant, though they might manifest in small ways. Intuition, quick reflexes, prophetic dreams. Luke paused. But power, especially untrained power, can be dangerous, particularly if someone with ill intent recognizes it and tries to exploit it. Are you suggesting my children are in danger? The protective father emerged fully now, Stark's eyes sharp with concern. Not immediate danger, Luke clarified. But if the darkness beyond your wall continues to grow, those with sensitivity to the force may feel its call, even unconsciously. Training would help them recognize and resist such influence. Stark returned to his seat, his expression troubled. And if I refuse this training? If I send you on your way? Luke met his gaze honestly. Then they'll continue as they are. Most will likely never know what they could have become. But some, those with the strongest connection, might experience things they can't explain. Dreams, visions, perhaps even abilities that manifest in moments of extreme emotion. Would they be harmed? Not by the force itself, Luke said. But untrained abilities can be frightening, confusing, and those who are different often face suspicion, fear. Stark fell silent, considering Luke's words. The fire crackled in the hearth, casting dancing shadows across his troubled face. This training, he finally asked, what would it involve? Nothing more dangerous than what they already learn in the practice yard, Luke assured him. Meditation, exercises to focus the mind, techniques to sense and eventually use the force. I would never put them at risk. And you believe this would help protect them from the darkness you sense? I do, Luke said simply. Knowledge is often the best defense against fear and manipulation. Stark rose and walked to the window, looking out at the night sky. Snow fell softly beyond the glass, illuminated by torchlight from the courtyard below. I must think on this, he said finally. Such decisions cannot be made hastily. You'll stay as our guest until I decide. I understand, Luke replied. Thank you for listening with an open mind. Few would have. Stark turned back from the window. The North remembers, Skywalker. Our histories speak of the long night, of the others, of magic in the world when most Southron lords dismiss such tales as nursery stories. I am not so quick to disbelieve. Wisdom often lies in remaining open to possibilities others dismiss, Luke observed. Perhaps. Stark moved toward the door. Rest tonight. We'll speak again tomorrow, after I've had time to consider your words. Luke rose, sensing the conversation had reached its natural conclusion. Thank you for your hospitality, Lord Stark. As they left the solar, Luke felt the weight of the encounter lifting. He hadn't revealed everything, nothing of spacecraft or distant worlds, but he'd shared enough truth to establish trust. The seed had been planted. Whether it would grow depended on many factors, not least Lord Stark's decision about his children's potential. The darkness beyond the wall troubled Luke deeply. It felt ancient, patient, and malevolent, not unlike the dark side nexus he'd encountered on other worlds. Whatever artifact had drawn him here was somehow connected to that darkness. Finding it had become more urgent than ever. As a servant led him to his assigned chambers, Luke reached out through the force, sensing the sleeping minds of the Stark children scattered throughout the keep. Their potential shimmered like stars in the night, each unique, each powerful in its own way. Whatever Lord Stark decided, Luke knew his crash landing on this world had not been an accident. Luke's chambers lay shrouded in darkness, the dying embers in the hearth casting faint orange shadows across stone walls. He sat cross-legged on the floor, eyes closed, breathing steady and measured. The force flowed through him like a river finding its course, stronger here than anywhere he'd experienced save Dagobah itself. 3 hours until dawn. 3 hours before the castle stirred to life. He rose in one fluid motion, muscles protesting slightly from the unfamiliar bed. The translator at his belt, with its soft blue indicator the only modern light in the medieval room. Luke secured it beneath his tunic, then wrapped his cloak around his shoulders. The door opened silently. He'd oiled the hinges before retiring. Stone corridors stretched before him, torchlight flickering at distant intervals. Guards would be posted at main entrances, but Luke had mapped their patterns during dinner. He moved like smoke through the shadows, the force muffling his footsteps. A guard dozed at his post near the kitchen entrance. Luke extended his hand, deepening the man's sleep with a gentle force suggestion. The guard's breathing grew heavier, his chin dropping further onto his chest. Outside, snow fell in thick curtains. The cold bit through Luke's cloak immediately, but he'd endured worse on Hoth. He pulled the hood up and set off across the courtyard, leaving shallow prints that the falling snow would soon obscure. Winterfell's walls loomed dark against the pre-dawn sky. Luke found the small postern gate he'd noted earlier, used by servants fetching water from the hot springs. The bar lifted easily with the force, and he slipped through into the wolfswood beyond. The forest embraced him with ancient silence. Pine boughs heavy with snow created natural corridors between the trees. He moved swiftly now, using force-enhanced speed to cover ground. His boots barely touched the snow as he leaped fallen logs and wove between towering sentinels. The crash site appeared through the trees like a scar on the landscape. The X-wing lay half-buried, one S-foil torn away, the cockpit canopy spiderwebbed with cracks. Snow had already begun to claim it, drifting against the fuselage. R2, Luke called softly. A muffled beep answered from beneath the snow. Luke brushed away the accumulation, revealing his astromech's dome. R2-D2's photoreceptor flickered to life, followed by an indignant series of whistles and chirps. I know. I'm sorry I left you. Luke checked the droid systems, relieved to find minimal cold damage. We need to move the ship. It's too exposed here. R2 swiveled his dome, sensors sweeping the area. His response scrolled across Luke's datapad. Structural damage severe. Flight systems inoperable. Suggest abandoning vessel. We're not abandoning her. Luke circled the X-wing, assessing options. There's a cave system about half a mile north. I saw it on the way down. The droid's skeptical whistle needed no translation. Luke placed both hands on the ship's hull, closing his eyes. The force flowed through him into the damaged metal. Lifting the X-wing was simple enough. The damaged fighter rose smoothly at his command, hovering several feet above the snow. The problem isn't lifting you, he said to the floating ship. It's the distance. R2 offered an understanding series of beeps from his position nearby. Luke sighed, gently lowering the X-wing back to the ground. Even a Jedi Master couldn't maintain that level of concentration over the miles to the cave while navigating unfamiliar terrain. The force was powerful, but practicality mattered too. We'll have to try something else, he muttered. Luke shifted his approach. Instead of sustained lifting, he created a force cushion beneath the ship and began to push. The X-wing slid forward through the snow, leaving a deep furrow. This method required less constant focus while still making steady progress. An hour passed. The sky lightened to pewter gray as Luke guided the ship across the landscape. His connection to the force remained unwavering, though the repetitive work was physically draining. The cave mouth finally appeared, a dark gash in a rocky hillside, partially concealed by overhanging pines. Luke guided the X-wing inside, the fit tighter than he'd hoped. Metal scraped against stone as he maneuvered the ship deeper into the cave. Finally, it settled in a wider chamber, hidden from casual observation. R2 run a full diagnostic. Check all systems. The astromech extended his interface arm, connecting to the ship's computer. After several minutes, his report appeared on the datapad. Hyperdrive destroyed. Sublight engines 15% functional. Life support failing. Communications array damaged but reparable. Can you boost the comm array? Try to reach Leia. R2's dome swiveled back and forth, a mechanical head shake. No hyperspace beacons detected. No holonet nodes. Unknown stellar position prevents standard communication protocols. Luke's heart sank. He'd suspected as much, but confirmation hit hard. This world existed beyond the known galaxy's communication network. Even if they repaired the array, there was no one to receive their signal. What about passive monitoring? Can you detect any transmissions? Negative. No electromagnetic communications detected. Planet appears PRE industrial. Set up a passive receiver anyway. Route it outside the cave, use the emergency antenna. If anyone from the New Republic comes looking, we need to know. R2 chirped acknowledgement but added a questioning whistle. I know it's unlikely, Luke admitted, but we have to try. In the meantime, I need you to go into hibernation mode. Conserve power. The droid's response was decidedly unhappy. A stream of agitated beeps and whistles filled the cave. I'm not abandoning you, Luke said firmly. But I can't have you rolling around Winterfell. These people have never seen a droid. You'd cause panic. R2's photoreceptor dimmed, the mechanical equivalent of a sulk. I'll check on you regularly. And if I find technology that can help repair the ship, I'll bring you back online immediately. More reluctant beeps, but R2 began his shutdown sequence. His various lights dimmed one by one until only the faintest standby glow remained. Luke turned his attention to the cave entrance. He needed to seal it, both to protect the ship and to prevent discovery. A massive boulder sat nearby, half buried in snow and earth. Luke reached out through the force, feeling its weight, its connection to the ground. The massive stone rolled forward with surprising grace, gathering momentum as it crossed the frozen ground. It settled across the cave mouth with a deep, resonating thud that Luke felt through the soles of his boots. Perfect. The entrance was sealed, with just enough gap at the top for ventilation. A gap remained at the top for ventilation, but the entrance was effectively sealed. Luke used smaller stones to fill the worst gaps, leaving the emergency antenna cable snaking through a narrow opening. Dawn was breaking as he finished. Pale light filtered through the forest canopy, turning the snow to silver. Luke needed to return before his absence was noticed. The journey back took less time. He knew the path now, and urgency lent him speed. The postern gate remained unbarred, the guard still dozing at his post. Luke slipped back through Winterfell's corridors like a ghost, reaching his chambers just as the castle bells rang the morning hour. He stripped off his snow-dampened cloak and boots, hanging them carefully to dry. Evidence of his expedition removed, Luke settled back into meditation position on the floor. To any servant who might check, he would appear to have spent the night in contemplation. But his mind raced with implications. The X-Wing was hidden but irreparable with local technology. R2 slept in electronic hibernation, monitoring for signals that would likely never come. He was truly stranded on this world, at least until he could find the artifact that had drawn him here. The Force had guided him to Winterfell for a reason. The Stark children's potential, the darkness growing beyond the wall, Lord Stark's grudging openness to the impossible. All threads in a pattern he couldn't yet see. A knock at his door interrupted his thoughts. Lord Skywalker? A servant's voice, hesitant. Lord Stark requests your presence at the morning meal. Thank you, Luke called back, surprised at how smoothly the words came now. The translator had done its work well. I'll be there shortly. He rose, muscles stiff from the night's exertion, and prepared to face another day of careful half-truths. The X-Wing was hidden, R2 was safe, and he had work to do. Whatever purpose the Force had brought him here to serve, it started with the Stark children and their untapped potential. As he dressed, Luke felt the white direwolf's presence somewhere in the castle below. Amidala, adjusting to her new surroundings just as he was. They were both strangers in this land, both guided by forces beyond normal understanding. He opened his door and stepped into the corridor, ready to continue the delicate dance of truth and necessity. Winterfell stones seemed to watch him pass, ancient and patient, keeping their secrets as carefully as he kept his own. Chapter 4, Beneath the Bleeding Tree. Year 298 AC/7 ABY. Winterfell, the North. Sleep eluded Eddard Stark. The Lord of Winterfell stood at his chamber window, watching moonlight spill across the ancient stones of the courtyard. His breath fogged the glass as the night's chill seeped through the castle walls. Behind him, the fire had burned low, casting long shadows that seemed to mirror the doubts warring in his mind. Luke Skywalker's demonstration, the picture rising in defiance of all natural law, replayed in his thoughts. Such power reminded him of tales old Nan told the children, stories of the age of heroes and magics long forgotten. Magic, he thought bitterly. The word tasted strange, like iron on his tongue. The North remembered when others forgot, but even Northerners spoke of magic as something belonging to the past. A soft knock interrupted his brooding. Enter, Ned called, turning from the window. Maester Luwin shuffled in, gray robes rustling against the floor. You sent for me, my lord? At this hour? What do you make of our guest, Luwin? Speak freely. The maester's chains clinked as he settled into a chair. Lord Skywalker's device, his translator, represents workmanship beyond anything in Westeros. Perhaps beyond anything in Essos as well. And his demonstration in my solar? Lewin's fingers tapped against his chain. I am a maester, my lord. We are taught to seek rational explanations. He hesitated. Yet I was not present to witness what occurred. He made a pitcher float through the air, poured wine without touching it. The maester's brow furrowed. Such claims. I saw it myself, Lewin, with these eyes. Then I cannot explain it, my lord, though I have noted oddities. Young Bran's climbing feats defy explanation. Jon Snow's uncanny bond with his wolf. Arya appears where she shouldn't be, as if from nowhere. Ned poured 2 cups of wine, his movements deliberate. The deserter spoke of White Walkers. The ravings of a broken man. Surely. Perhaps. Ned handed Lewin a cup. Yet Skywalker speaks of darkness beyond the wall, and he has never met the deserter. They drank in silence. Beyond the window, clouds obscured the moon, darkening the yard. If he speaks true, Ned said finally, my children may need these skills he offers. My lord, such practices could save their lives. Ned's voice hardened. Winter is coming, Lewin. I feel it in my bones. A winter unlike any we've known. The maester nodded slowly. What will you do? I will allow this training, but in absolute secrecy. None beyond our walls must know. And Lady Stark? Catelyn will know. She deserves that much. Ned drained his cup. But first I would see Skywalker's skill with a blade. A man who would teach my children must prove his worth in our ways. You mean to test him in the practice yard? Aye. The children speak of knights and legends. Let us see if Skywalker fights as strangely as he speaks. Ned's gray eyes fixed on the distant Trilene. Send word at first light. I would break my fast with our guest, then meet him with steel in hand. Lewin bowed and departed, leaving Ned alone with his thoughts once more. The fire sputtered out, plunging the chamber into darkness. In that moment, Ned felt the weight of the North upon his shoulders, and for the first time in many years, he feared he might not be strong enough to bear it. The morning air bit sharp against Jon's cheeks as he entered the practice yard, his breath forming small clouds in the cold. Ghost padded silently beside him, the direwolf's red eyes scanning the empty space before settling near the armory wall. Jon's muscles still ached from yesterday's exercises, but the familiar weight of his practice sword brought comfort as he drew it from its sheath. Starting without me? Robb's voice carried across the yard. His half-brother strode through the archway, auburn hair catching the weak northern sun. Thought you might spend all morning brooding in the Godswood. Jon rolled his shoulders, testing his range of motion. Someone has to pray for your sword work. It seems your prayers have been answered. Robb grinned, selecting a blunted blade from the rack. The steel rang softly as he tested its balance. They circled each other, boots crunching on frost-hardened dirt. The sound carried sharp in the morning stillness, punctuated only by the distant clang of the smithy beginning its day's work. Jon watched Robb's footwork. His brother favored his right side, always had since that tumble from the broken tower when they were boys. The memory flickered and vanished as steel met steel with a crack that sent vibrations singing up Jon's arm. The impact jarred his teeth, but Jon twisted away, using the momentum to bring his blade around in a tight arc. Robb's parry came a heartbeat late. The edge of Jon's practice sword caught his brother's shoulder, not hard enough to bruise through the padded leather, but enough to score. Getting slow, Jon taunted, dancing back from Robb's counterstrike. His breath misted between them, and he tasted iron at the back of his throat from the cold air and exertion. Getting cocky. Robb's jaw tightened, that particular set that meant he was done playing. He pressed forward with sudden fury, launching a series of cuts that rang out like hammer blows. Each strike came faster than the last. High, low, thrust, sweep, forcing Jon to give ground across the packed earth. Their swords wove silver patterns in the weak morning light, each testing the other's defenses with the intimate knowledge of 100 shared battles. Jon felt the rhythm of combat settle into his bones. Block, parry, thrust, retreat. His muscles remembered this dance even as they protested yesterday's training. Sweat began to bead beneath his jerkin despite the cold, trickling down his spine. Robb's technique was textbook perfect, each form executed exactly as Ser Roderick had drilled into them since they could barely lift wooden swords. The master-at-arms would have been proud. But Jon had spent countless extra hours in this yard when others supped or slept, pushing himself until his palms bled and his arms shook. Every sneer, every Lord Snow, every reminder of his bastard blood. He channeled it all into the blade. While Rob learned to be a lord, Jon had learned to fight like he had nothing to lose. The difference showed now. Where Rob's movements were precise and practiced, Jon's had become something else. Fluid, unpredictable, shaped by desperation as much as training. He saw the moment Rob realized it too, saw the flicker of uncertainty in those Tully blue eyes. There. Rob overextended on a downward cut, trying to break through Jon's guard with brute force. The opening lasted less than a heartbeat, but Jon had been waiting for it. He sidestepped smooth as water, brought his pommel up in a sharp strike that caught Rob's wrist with a meaty thwack. His brother's fingers spasmed, grip loosening just enough. Jon hooked his leg behind Rob's knee and pulled. Rob hit the ground hard, breath whooshing out in a white cloud. The frozen dirt would leave bruises, Jon knew. Before his brother could roll away or bring his sword up, Jon planted a boot on Rob's sword arm and laid his blade against the exposed throat. The dulled edge pressed just hard enough to dimple skin. "Yield?" Jon asked, breathing hard. His pulse hammered in his ears, and he could smell his own sweat mixing with the iron and leather scent of the practice yard. Rob's scowl lasted 3 heartbeats before melting into that rueful laugh Jon knew so well, the one that said his brother's pride was stung but not broken. I yield." His voice came out rough and he swallowed against the blade. "Now help me up, you smug bastard, before my arse freezes to the ground." Jon grinned despite himself, the familiar insult carrying only warmth between them. He pulled the sword away and offered his hand. Rob's fingers were cold even through their gloves as Jon hauled him upright. His brother winced, rolling the wrist Jon had struck. "Ser Rodrik teach you that pommel trick?" Rob asked, brushing dirt and frost from his breeches with his good hand. "Learned it from watching you." Jon sheathed his practice sword. Movement near the keep's entrance caught his eye. Their father emerged with Luke Skywalker at his side. The stranger wore simple northern clothes now, wool and leather instead of his strange black garments. But something about his bearing remained foreign. The way he moved, perhaps. Too fluid, too aware. "Speaking of our mysterious guest," Rob muttered, brushing dirt from his breeches. Lord Stark's face revealed nothing as he approached with measured steps. Behind him, Jory and Alan flanked Skywalker like guards escorting a prisoner, though the man walked freely. "Jon, Rob." Their father's voice carried its usual gravity. "You fight well this morning." "Jon fights well," Rob corrected. "I eat dirt well." The ghost of a smile touched Lord Stark's lips before his expression hardened again. He turned to his guards. "Jory, Alan, our guest wishes to demonstrate his skill with a blade. Test him." Jon exchanged a quick glance with Rob. Their father's tone brooked no argument, but the request itself was strange. Why test a guest in such a manner? "My lord," Jory said carefully. "Perhaps one of the younger men." "No, I want experienced fighters." Lord Stark's gray eyes fixed on Skywalker. "Blunted steel only." Luke inclined his head, accepting a practice sword from Alan. He held it awkwardly for a moment, as if unfamiliar with its weight, then adjusted his grip. Something in his stance shifted, subtle but unmistakable. Jon had seen master swordsmen before, men who made steel an extension of their will. This was different. This was Jon. "Rob." Arya's voice shattered his thoughts. His little sister raced across the yard, Bran and Sansa trailing behind. "What's happening? Why is everyone—" "Hush," Sansa chided, though her blue eyes sparkled with curiosity. "Father's testing Lord Skywalker." "He's not a lord," Arya protested, but she fell silent as Jory and Alan spread apart, preparing to attack from 2 angles. Jon found himself moving closer to his siblings, Rob beside him. "This should be interesting," Rob murmured. Jory struck first, a probing thrust that Skywalker deflected with minimal effort. Alan came from the left, trying to catch him off balance. Luke pivoted, his blade sweeping both attacks aside in a single fluid motion. The guards pressed harder, working in tandem as they'd done in real battles. Steel rang against steel in a rapid staccato. Then Skywalker moved, and Jon's breath caught. It wasn't swordplay as he knew it. Luke flowed between their attacks like water between stones, each movement precise yet effortless. His blade traced impossible arcs, deflecting strikes that should have landed, finding openings that shouldn't exist. Jory stumbled back from a strike he couldn't quite block. Alan's sword flew from nerveless fingers after a twist of Luke's wrist that Jon couldn't follow. Within heartbeats, both guards knelt in the dirt, Luke's practice blade hovering at their throats. 7 hells, Robb breathed. Jon couldn't speak. His mind raced, trying to reconcile what he'd witnessed with everything Ser Rodrik had taught them about swordplay. Those movements, that speed, the way Luke had seemed to know where each attack would come before it landed. Their father's expression remained carved from stone as he approached his children. Robb, Jon, Sansa, Arya, Bran. He looked at each of them in turn. Lord Skywalker has agreed to serve as your new instructor in the fighting arts. Father, Sansa's voice pitched high with surprise. But Ser Rodrik, Robb began, will continue your regular lessons. Lord Stark's tone allowed no debate. Lord Skywalker will provide additional training, private training. You will speak of this to no one outside our family. Is that understood? Jon nodded with his siblings, though his mind churned with questions. He caught Luke's eye across the yard. The man offered a slight smile, and for just a moment, Jon could have sworn he felt something. A presence, a weight, like being watched by some great beast in the darkness. Ghost stirred beside him, a low whine escaping the direwolf pup's throat. Jon's hand found his companion's fur, but his eyes remained fixed on their new teacher. What are you? He wondered. What secrets do you hold? Robb pushed the last bite of black bread around his trencher, watching the grease congeal in the cooling mutton broth. Across the table, Jon caught his eye and nodded toward the door. Time to meet their mysterious new instructor. Where are you lot sneaking off to? Theon drawled from his seat, lips curled in that perpetual smirk that made Robb want to plant a fist in his teeth. Father requested we meet him in the Godswood after the meal. The lie came smooth as silk. Father had been clear. No one outside the family could know about these private lessons. Theon let out a harsh bark of laughter. The sacred grove? Planning to have the old gods bless your sword arms. Robb stood, ignoring the jibe. His siblings rose with him. Jon steady and watchful, Arya practically vibrating with excitement, Bran trying to look older than his 7 years. Even Sansa joined them, though she'd barely touched her food. The path to the gods would wound through the oldest part of Winterfell, where the stones remembered the kings of winter. Their boots crunched on frost-brittle grass as they passed beneath the shadow of the first keep. The air tasted of coming snow and old earth. Think he'll teach us that spinning move? Arya's voice cut through the quiet. The one where he, Arya. Sansa's reproach carried all their mother's hauteur. Ladies don't discuss swordplay. Good thing I'm not a lady then. Robb bit back a smile. The gods would open before them, ancient sentinels standing guard over sacred ground. Red leaves rustled overhead, whispering secrets in the old tongue. At the heart of it all, beneath the bone-white branches of the weirwood, Luke Skywalker sat cross-legged on the cold earth. His eyes were closed, hands resting on his knees, still as the carved face above him. They approached in silence, even Arya subdued by the weight of the place. The smell of sap and decay filled Robb's nostrils. Life and death mingled, as the old gods preferred. Bran crept closer, craning his neck. Is he sleeping? Luke's eyes opened. Not suddenly, not with a start, but smooth as water flowing over stone. Those strange blue eyes, too light for a northerner, too knowing for his years, fixed on Bran with an intensity that made Robb's hand twitch toward his sword hilt. I was listening. Luke's voice carried that odd accent, words shaped by distant lands. He unfolded from his position with liquid grace, rising to face them. Thank you for coming. Father said you would train us. Jon's words held challenge and curiosity in equal measure. Train. Luke seemed to taste the word. Yes, though perhaps not in the way you expect. He gestured for them to sit. Please. They arranged themselves in a half-circle on the cold ground. Robb felt the damp seeping through his breeches but held his tongue. Whatever game this was, he'd play it through. Tell me? Luke began, settling back into his cross-legged position. What do you know of the magic that binds all living things? Silence stretched between them. Robb glanced at Jon, who shrugged minutely. The old gods. Bran ventured. They're in the trees and stones and yes and no. Luke's smile held secrets. The old gods and the new, all names for something greater. Something that flows through every living thing, connecting us. He held up a hand, fingers spread. In the lands beyond the Sunset Sea, we call it the Force. Sounds like hedge wizard nonsense, Robb said, testing. Luke's smile widened. Does it? You felt it, Robb Stark. When you know your brother's mind without words. When you sense danger before it strikes. When your hand finds your sword hilt in the dark. A chill ran down Rob's spine that had nothing to do with the cold ground. My teachers trained me to understand this power, Luke continued, as I will teach you to feel its currents, to let it guide my actions. Where I come from, those who use the Force for the betterment of others are called Jedi. Jedi. Arya rolled the strange word on her tongue like a sweet she'd never tasted. Are you saying we could learn this? Not could. Will. Luke's expression grew grave, the shadows beneath the weirwood deepening the lines around his eyes. The Force flows strongly in your bloodline, and I can teach you to use your gifts to those in need and each other. Sansa shifted beside Rob, her discomfort palpable. The Seven teach that sorcery is an abomination, that only the gods should wield such power. And yet your house keeps the old gods, Luke observed. Tell me, Lady Sansa, is the weirwood's sight sorcery? When your brother climbs walls no man should scale, is that witchcraft? When your own wolf answers your unspoken call. That's different, she insisted, but doubt colored her voice. Is it? Luke rose again, smooth and sudden. Let me show you something. He extended one hand toward a fallen branch near the pool. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then the wood twitched, rose, floated through the air as if carried by invisible hands, spinning slowly until it came to rest in Luke's palm. Rob scrambled backward, heart hammering. Beside him, his siblings recoiled. All save Bran, who leaned forward with wonder bright in his eyes. Sorcery, Sansa gasped. Demon work. The only aberrations here are those we birth from terror and willful blindness. Luke's words hung steady as the suspended timber. He let the branch settle into the earth with deliberate care. This is merely another thread in the tapestry of life. You've lost your wits. Jon's words scraped raw from his throat. This isn't... We can't. Can't you? Luke remained motionless as they edged away, a statue beneath the bleeding leaves. Your father has named me your instructor. You may flee, but we will meet again tomorrow, and the day after, until you understand what you are. Sansa broke first, silk skirts rustling as she fled toward the keep. Rob moved to follow, protective instinct flaring, but Luke's voice stopped him. Let her go. Fear must be faced in its own time. To force understanding is the way of tyrants. Rob turned back, torn between duty to his sister and his father's command. You speak of understanding, but you show us impossibilities. I show you truth. Luke's gaze swept over them. All of you have the gift. Raw, untrained, but undeniable. He paused. Without training, it will manifest in dreams, in moments of extreme emotion. With training, he didn't finish, but Rob heard the promise. Power, understanding, control over forces that terrified and thrilled in equal measure. Show us, Bran said, small voice carrying surprising steel. Show us what we could become. Luke studied the boy for a long moment. Very well, but first you must learn to feel. He sank back to the ground, gesturing for them to join him. Close your eyes. Breathe. Feel the earth beneath you, the air around you. Feel the life of the godswood. Every root, every leaf, every creature that crawls or flies. Rob wanted to protest, to demand real training with steel and strength. But Jon was already settling into position, and he'd not be shown up by his younger brother. He closed his eyes. Good, Luke murmured. Now reach out, not with your hands, with your mind. Feel the connections between all things. The Force flows through you, around you, binding you to everything that lives. At first, Rob felt only cold earth and creeping damp. Then, something else. A warmth that had nothing to do with temperature. A presence that pressed against his mind like gray wind's wet nose against his palm. He gasped, eyes flying open. Around him, his siblings sat with various expressions of wonder and fear. Jon's face had gone pale, knuckles white where he gripped his knees. Arya grinned fierce and wild. Bran seemed to glow, joy radiating from every line of his small body. What? Rob's voice cracked. He swallowed, tried again. What was that? The beginning, Luke said simply. The first step on a path that will change everything you thought you knew about yourselves and your world. Rob met Jon's eyes, saw his own mix of terror and exhilaration reflected there. Whatever they'd agreed to, whatever father had set in motion, there was no going back now. The godswood held its breath around them, ancient powers stirring in response to this new teaching. When do we start? Arya demanded, bouncing on her knees. Luke's smile was answer enough. Chapter 5. Dancing Snow, Rising Stones. Year 298 AC/7 ABY. Winterfell, the North. Jon's knees ached against the cold earth, but the discomfort faded as Luke's voice washed over them like warm honey. The gods would held its breath, even the ravens silent in their roosts. Now we begin properly, Luke said, settling into that same cross-legged position. Close your eyes again. This time don't just feel, reach out. The Force isn't something you possess. Possesses you, flows through you. You're merely a vessel. A vessel. Jon shut his eyes, trying to ignore how Ghost pressed against his side, radiating warmth through his black wool. The darkness behind his lids pulsed red with firelight from the distant keep. Breathe, Luke instructed. In through your nose, out through your mouth. Feel your heartbeat slow. Jon's chest rose and fell. Beside him, Arya's breathing came quick and eager, while Robb's measured cadence spoke of forced calm. Bran made no sound at all. Good. Now, reach. First, nothing. Just cold and damp and the copper taste of coming snow on his tongue. Then, gods, crashed into him like a hammer to the gut. Not warmth exactly, but presence. Life. The weirwood's ancient consciousness pressed against his mind, vast and patient as stone. Beneath that, smaller sparks. Beetles in the bark, worms in the soil, his siblings burning bright as hearth fires beside him. And Ghost blazed like the sun. Jon's eyes snapped open, gasping. The world looked different, sharper. He could see the individual ice crystals forming on Arya's dark hair, count the heartbeats in Robb's throat, feel the excitement radiating from Bran like heat from a forge. 7 hells, Robb breathed. What was that? Arya's grin stretched wide enough to split her face. I felt everything. The trees, the ground, even you lot. Luke nodded, unsurprised. The Force connects all living things. What you felt was your first conscious touch of that connection. It's like a giant web, Bran said softly. But more. Jon's hands trembled. He clenched them into fists, leather gloves creaking. This power, this presence, it felt too large for his body, like trying to pour the ocean into a wine cup. Now, Luke continued, producing a small stone from his pocket. We'll try something more focused. He set the stone on the ground between them. Who wants to? Me. Arya lunged forward. Patience. Luke's tone carried gentle reproach. Jon, you first. You have the strongest connection. Heat crept up Jon's neck. Bastards aren't supposed to be strongest at anything. But Luke waited, expectant, and his siblings watched with varying degrees of envy and curiosity. What do I do? Feel the stone. Not with your fingers, with the Force. Every object has presence, weight in the current. Find it. Jon stared at the gray pebble, smooth and unremarkable. He reached out again, trying to recapture that overwhelming sensation. This time it came easier, like slipping into a warm bath. The world expanded. He felt the stone's density, its age, the memory of water that had shaped it. Good. Now, lift it. Lift it. Jon's voice cracked. With my mind. With the Force. Will and action are one. Don't think about moving it. Simply move it. Jon extended his hand, fingers splayed. The stone sat there, mocking him. He pushed, mentally straining until sweat beaded on his forehead despite the cold. Nothing. You're trying too hard, Luke said. The Force isn't a battering ram. It's a river. Guide it, don't force it. Guide it. Jon exhaled slowly, releasing his desperate grip on the power. Instead of pushing, he invited. Asked. The stone twitched. Arya squeaked. Robb swore. The stone rolled, then rose. Barely a finger's width, wobbling like a drunk man. Jon! Bran's voice pitched high with excitement. The stone dropped. Jon's concentration shattered, and with it came a wave of exhaustion that left him sagging. Well done. Luke's approval warmed more than any fire. Most students take weeks to achieve even that much. I moved it. Jon stared at his hands as if they belonged to someone else. I actually. Show me how, Arya demanded. I want to try. In time. But first, Luke's expression grew serious. There's something we must discuss. In my order, students address their teachers as master. It's a term of respect for knowledge and experience. Nothing more. The word hung in the air like a blade. Master. Jon's jaw tightened. In Westeros, that word meant ownership. chains, everything he'd fought against even as a bastard. You want us to call you master? Rob's voice carried an edge sharp enough to cut. Like we're your thralls? No. Luke shook his head. I see this troubles you. In my culture, it simply means teacher. One who has mastered the ways of the Force and passes that mastery to others. But if the word offends, it's what slaves call their owners. Arya spat. Then we'll find another term. Luke's calm never wavered. Teacher, perhaps. Or simply Luke. The title matters less than the learning. Jon studied the man's scarred face, searching for deception. Found none. Where you come from, this is normal. Students calling teachers master? For thousands of years. But I'm not in my homeland now. I'll adapt to your customs. Master, Bran said firmly. We'll call you master. Luke inclined his head. As you wish. The tension eased, but questions gnawed at Jon like hunger. Where did this man come from that students willingly called teachers master? What order taught men to move stones with thought alone? Again, Luke said, placing the stone back in the center. Arya, your turn. As his little sister attacked the exercise with characteristic ferocity, Jon caught Rob's eye. His brother's expression mirrored his own thoughts. What have we gotten ourselves into? But beneath the fear, beneath the questions, something else stirred. Power. Purpose. For the first time in his life, Jon Snow felt like he might be meant for something more than just a bastard's lot. The stone jumped under Arya's glare, and her whoop of triumph echoed through the godswood. Catelyn found her husband beneath the heart tree, its bone-white bark gleaming like old ivory in the filtered afternoon light. The godswood held that peculiar stillness it always possessed. Not silence, but a muffled quality that made the world beyond its walls seem distant and unimportant. Snow dusted Ned's shoulders where he knelt before the weirwood's carved face. Those terrible eyes weeping red sap that looked too much like blood. The parchment in her hand crackled as her fingers tightened. Such a small thing to carry such enormous weight. Ned. He didn't startle. He never did when she found him here. His head turned slightly, acknowledging her presence without breaking whatever communion he sought with his gods. The old gods, not hers. Even after all these years, she felt like an intruder in this place. Cat. His voice carried that particular roughness it held after prayer. What brings you to the gods' wood? She stepped closer, her boots crunching through the thin crust of snow. The cold bit through her woolen cloak, but the chill running down her spine had nothing to do with winter. A raven came from King's Landing. Now he turned fully, rising from his knees with the careful movements of a man who'd been still too long in the cold. His gray eyes, so like the storm clouds gathering overhead, found hers immediately. He knew. Of course he knew. Bad news traveled on black wings. Jon Arryn. Dead. The word fell between them like a stone into still water. The fever took him quickly, Pycelle writes. 5 days from hail to grave. Ned's jaw tightened, the only sign of the grief that must be tearing through him. Jon Arryn had been more than his foster father. He'd been the man who shaped him, who'd raised him alongside Robert in the Aerys' cold halls. There's more. She held out the second parchment, this one bearing the royal seal. Robert rides for Winterfell. He'll be here within the moon's turn. Robert is coming here? The surprise in his voice might have been amusing under different circumstances. After all these years. He needs a new hand. She didn't need to say more. They both knew why Robert would make such a journey. Ned took the letter, breaking the seal with deliberate care. His eyes moved across the words, and she watched the understanding dawn on his face, followed swiftly by something that looked dangerously like dread. He means to ask me. He means to command you. Catelyn moved closer, close enough to smell the pine resin and old leather that always clung to him. You know, Robert, he won't take no for an answer. No. The word came out firm, decisive. My place is here. The North needs. The North needs its lord alive. The sharpness in her voice surprised them both. Ned, Jon Arryn is dead. Your foster father, a man who survived the Mad King and a rebellion, dead of a fever that took him in days. Does that not strike you as strange? Cat. His hand found her arm warm even through the layers of wool. Not here. She glanced around the empty godswood, then back at his face. Understanding bloomed cold in her chest. Even here, even in this sacred place, he feared listening ears. What had happened to them, that they must guard their words in their own home? There's something else. She kept her voice low, though anger began to kindle beneath her breastbone. "I went to find you in the yard, to tell you about John Aaron. Imagine my surprise when I found our children, all our children, being instructed by that stranger." Ned's expression didn't change, but she knew him well enough to see the slight tension around his eyes. "Including the bastard." The word tasted bitter as it always did. "You gave him leave to train Jon Snow alongside our trueborn children? And the girls, Ned? What are you thinking?" "I'm thinking of their safety." His voice remained maddeningly calm. "Skywalker has skills that could protect them." "Protect them?" She pulled away from his touch. "From what?" "He's filling their heads with talk of mystical powers and impossible things. Arya came to me yesterday claiming she could make her cup move without touching it. Sansa asked if the faith is wrong about magic. What poison is he feeding them?" "It's not poison," but doubt colored his words. "Then what is it? Sorcery? Some foreign magic?" Her voice rose despite her efforts to control it. "And you let him near our daughters?" "My lady." "Lord Stark." The voice came from behind them, soft and unassuming, but Catelyn spun as if struck. Luke Skywalker stood at the edge of the grove, and she had not heard him approach. No snow crunched beneath his feet. No branch had announced his passage. "Forgive the intrusion." He inclined his head, that strange courtesy of his that seemed both foreign and familiar. "I sensed distress. I thought perhaps I might help clarify." "You sensed?" Catelyn's fear crystallized into anger. "What right have you to sense anything about me?" "None, my lady." He stepped forward, and she fought the urge to retreat. There was nothing threatening in his manner, yet something about him set every instinct screaming. "But the Force, what I call this gift, it connects all living things. Strong emotions create ripples. More sorcerers talk." "Cat," Ned began, but she cut him off with a gesture. "No, I'll not have my children corrupted by—" She stopped, searching for words. "By whatever this is." Luke studied her for a long moment, those strange blue eyes seeming to see more than they should. Then he extended his hand, palm up, empty. "May I show you something, Lady Stark? Nothing harmful, I promise. Just a demonstration." She glanced at Ned, who nodded slowly. Against her better judgment, she gave her consent with a sharp jerk of her chin. Luke's eyes unfocused slightly, and the snow around his feet began to swirl. Not blown by wind, there was no wind. The flakes rose in a perfect spiral, dancing around his outstretched hand like white butterflies. They formed shapes, a wolf, a fish, a crown, before dissolving back into gentle falling snow. "A trick," she breathed, but her voice lacked conviction. "The beginning of understanding." Luke's hand lowered, and the snow returned to its natural fall. "Your children are special, Lady Stark. All of them. They have a connection to this energy, this force that could help them in the trials to come." "What trials?" Ned's voice sharpened. "You spoke of darkness beyond the wall." Luke's expression grew distant, troubled. "I see fragments. Visions granted by the Force. Ice and death marching south. A long night that seeks to swallow all warmth." His focus returned to them. "Your children will face choices that could save or doom thousands. Would you have them face such moments unprepared?" "You speak in riddles." But Catelyn heard the fear beneath her own anger. "Visions and prophecies." "Not prophecies. Possibilities." Luke's voice gentled. "The future is always in motion. But I've seen enough to know that winter is coming, as your words say. And it will be unlike any winter your history's record." "The others are gone," Ned said quietly. "Dead 8,000 years. Death is not always final." Luke's words sent ice through Catelyn's veins. "And some things that sleep are merely waiting for the right moment to wake." Silence stretched between them, broken only by the heart tree's faint groaning in the wind. Catelyn found herself staring at those weeping eyes, the red sap that looked so much like blood, like tears. "Even if I believed you," she said finally, "why should I trust you with my children? You appear from nowhere, speaking of powers and distant threats. For all we know, you could be the danger you warn against." Luke smiled then, sad and knowing. "A fair question, my lady. I can offer only this: judge me by my actions. I've asked for no payment, made no demands. I seek only to prepare them for what's coming." "And Jon Snow," the name burned her throat. "Why include him?" "Because his strength could make the difference between victory and defeat." Luke met her gaze steadily. I understand your pain, Lady Stark, but the boy didn't choose his birth. And in the trials ahead, you'll need every sword, every gift, every soul willing to stand against the dark. She wanted to rage at him, to deny his words, to forbid him from speaking of things he couldn't understand. But something in his eyes and the way his eyes bore into Ned stilled her tongue. I don't trust you, she said finally. I don't trust this power you claim to wield. But if Ned believes you can help protect our children. She looked at her husband, seeing her own fears reflected in his eyes. Then I'll not stand in your way. But know this, Luke Skywalker. If any harm comes to them through your teaching, no power in this world or any other will save you from a mother's wrath. Luke bowed deeply. I would expect nothing less, my lady. Before either of them could question him further, he turned and walked away, his footsteps finally making sound in the snow. Caitlin watched him go, this strange man who spoke of powers beyond understanding, who claimed to see fragments of the future. She reached for Ned's hand, needing the solid warmth of it. I'm frightened, she admitted, the words barely a whisper. His fingers tightened around hers. So am I. Sansa sat at her dressing table, ivory comb trembling in her hand. The polished silver mirror reflected a face she barely recognized. Pale as fresh milk, with shadows beneath her tully blue eyes that hadn't been there yesterday. Sorcery. The word tasted bitter on her tongue, like the medicine Maester Luwin gave for winter fever. She'd been taught the stories, of course. How the Undulls brought the light of the Seven to Westeros, driving out the dark magic of the first men. How only in the north did men still cling to their heart trees and old ways. But this was different. This was real. The comb caught in a tangle, and she winced, working it free with practiced fingers. Through her window came the familiar morning sounds of Winterfell. The ring of hammer on anvil from Micken's forge, the baying of hounds in the kennels, Ser Roderick's gruff voice calling instructions in the yard. Normal sounds, safe sounds. Not like the whisper of that branch rising without wind. Not like the stone dancing between her siblings' hands. My lady! Jane Poole peered around the door, brown curls bouncing. Shall I help with your hair? No. The word came sharper than intended. Sansa forced a smile, the kind mother had taught her. Lips curved just so, never showing teeth. Thank you, Jane. I'll manage. Jane's face fell slightly, but she bobbed a curtsy and withdrew. Sansa turned back to her reflection, fingers working automatically to braid her auburn hair. The motion soothed her, each twist and fold a small rebellion against the chaos in her mind. She'd run. Like a child frightened by shadows, she'd fled the Godswood, leaving her siblings to what? To learn dark arts from a stranger who made snow dance and spoke of powers beyond understanding? The braid slipped. She started again. Arya hadn't run. Arya never ran from anything, the little wolf. Even now, Sansa could picture her sister's gray eyes bright with excitement, that fierce grin splitting her long face as the stone wobbled upward. Look, Sansa, I'm doing it. I'm really doing it. The memory sent something sharp and ugly twisting through Sansa's chest. Not fear this time. Something worse. She secured the braid with a blue ribbon. Tully colors Mother would approve, and smoothed her gray wool dress. Everything proper. Everything as it should be. Except it wasn't. Because while she'd been learning to curtsy and embroider and sing, Arya had been learning to move objects with her mind. While she'd memorized the lineages of great houses, Jon Snow had made a stone float. The unfairness of it burned. She was the one who did everything right, who remembered her courtesies and kept her dress clean and never spoke out of turn. She was the one who would marry a great lord someday, who would be great lady, maybe even queen. The king arrives within the fortnight, she whispered to her reflection. Prince Joffrey will come, golden-haired and handsome, like the princes in her songs. Surely when she saw him, when she danced with him in Winterfell's great hall, this strange ache would fade. Surely a true prince would drive away thoughts of floating stones and mysterious teachers and the way the gods would have thrummed with something ancient and alive. She rose, skirts rustling, and made her way to the September. The seven-sided building stood apart from Winterfell's heart, its very stones a reminder that she was her mother's daughter, not just her father's. Here, at least, the world made sense. But even as she knelt before the maiden's altar, even as she mouthed the familiar prayers, she couldn't forget the look in Luke Skywalker's strange blue eyes, patient, knowing, as if he saw something in her that she couldn't see herself. All of you are special, he'd said. Please, she whispered to the painted face above her. Please let Prince Joffrey come soon. Let him come and make her forget this force, this power that called to something deep in her Stark blood. Let him come and remind her who she was meant to be. Proper lady, not a sorceress, never that.